Emma Carlyle couldn't stop thinking about Jack. The way he sat so still in the holding cell, the strange calm in his eyes. It didn't match the usual cases she worked on. Most of the time, her clients were nervous, agitated, or downright angry. But Jack, he was something else. After a few hours of paperwork, she couldn't wait any longer. She pulled out her phone and started searching. John Doe, she typed, but got nowhere. She pulled up his booking info. Nothing. No records, no address. She even checked the Department of Veterans Affairs to see if there was any mention of him there. Still nothing. Feeling frustrated, Emma went to the courthouse library and started digging into old missing persons reports. She couldn't shake the feeling that Jack's story wasn't as simple as a man stealing bread. Something felt off, and she couldn't let it go. As the hours passed, Emma looked at page after page of old records. It was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. But just as she was about to give up for the day, something caught her eye. There was a report from 10 years ago about a soldier named Jack Davison. He had been listed as missing in action after a failed military mission in the Middle East. The report said he had been part of an Army Ranger unit. It was the same name, the same age. And the report said he had been presumed dead. She felt a chill run down her spine. Could this be the same person? Emma reread the report. It matched. Everything about it lined up. The name, the age, even the military details. There was a photo, too, though it was a bit blurry. Still, it looked like Jack. Emma's heart raced as she went back to her office and called her colleague, Jim. "Jim, you need to see something," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I think I've found who Jack really is." Jim came over quickly. "What's going on?" "This guy is a former Army Ranger, missing in action. Presumed dead. His name is Jack Davison," Emma said, showing him the file. "This isn't just some random homeless guy." Jim looked at the photo, then back at Emma. "You think he's the same person?" "I'm almost sure of it," Emma replied. "The name, the age, the military background, everything checks out. But why is he here, in a holding cell, stealing food?" "Maybe he didn't want anyone to know who he really was," Jim said, sounding thoughtful. Emma frowned. It didn't make sense. Why would a man who had been missing for 10 years choose to live on the streets, hiding from the world? And why wouldn't he tell anyone his real name? There was still so much more to uncover, but one thing was clear. Jack wasn't just another case. This was something bigger, something deeper. And Emma was determined to find out what it was. Jack didn't speak much after that conversation with Emma. But something had shifted. He was still quiet, still closed off, but he had stopped looking at the floor all the time. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, something like hope, or maybe just the idea of it. It wasn't much, but it was progress. Over the next few days, Emma worked tirelessly to arrange things for Jack. She reached out to veteran support groups, contacted therapists who specialized in trauma, and worked with the judge to get him the proper care. It wasn't going to be easy, but Emma was determined to give Jack a chance at rebuilding his life. It wasn't long before Emma brought Jack to a meeting with a therapist named Dr. Lewis. Dr. Lewis was older, with a calm demeanor and a kind smile. He didn't pressure Jack to talk, didn't rush him. He simply sat across from him and gave him space. Jack was uneasy at first. He fidgeted in his seat, avoiding eye contact. But Dr. Lewis didn't push him. He just talked about simple things, small moments, like the weather or how people deal with tough situations. Slowly, Jack began to open up, though it was only a little. "You're not alone in this, Jack," Dr. Lewis said after a long silence. "A lot of veterans struggle with what you've been through. It's okay to ask for help. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong." Jack looked at the therapist, his lips pressed tight. But for the first time, he seemed to believe it. Maybe he wasn't broken beyond repair. Maybe, just maybe, he could rebuild himself, piece by piece. Meanwhile, Emma was working on getting Jack's military records released. She had a hunch that there was more to his story than just being a hero on a failed mission. She didn't know what, but she had a feeling it could explain why he had disappeared and why he was living in the shadows for so long. One afternoon, while she was sifting through paperwork, Emma got a call from Lieutenant Harper. "Emma," he said, his voice low, "I found something. You need to see it." "What is it?" she asked, her pulse quickening. "There's a report," he said, "a classified one. It was filed after the mission. Jack, he wasn't just a soldier on that mission. He was part of something bigger, something the Army wanted to keep quiet." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" "It's complicated," Lieutenant Harper said, "but I'll bring the file to you. Meet me tomorrow." Emma didn't waste time. She knew this could be the missing piece of the puzzle. The reason why Jack had disappeared. Why he had been living like a ghost. She just hoped that when she found out the truth, it wouldn't destroy the fragile progress he had made. The next day, Emma met with Lieutenant Harper. As he handed her the file, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was inside would change everything. Emma couldn't shake the image of Jack from her mind. A former Army Ranger, presumed dead for years. The more she thought about it, the more questions piled up. Why was he on the streets? Why hadn't he gone to his family or the military after he escaped whatever happened overseas? And what had happened to him in the years he was gone? She spent the next few days digging deeper. She called veterans organizations, searching for any trace of Jack Davison. Most of the records were old, and many of the soldiers who had served with him in the unit were now retired or unreachable. But one name stood out: Lieutenant William Harper. He was listed as the commanding officer of the unit that had been sent on that mission where Jack had gone missing. After a few calls, Emma finally got a hold of Lieutenant Harper, now retired. His voice was deep, tired, but kind. "I remember that mission like it was yesterday," he told her. "We were supposed to extract a group of civilians in a war zone. Everything went wrong. I lost men that day. And Davison, he saved my life." "You knew him?" Emma asked, surprised. "Yeah, I did. Jack was always one of the toughest soldiers we had. He didn't hesitate to jump into dangerous situations, even when everyone else was pulling back. But after that mission, we thought he was dead. We couldn't find him. His body wasn't recovered. We assumed he had been taken." Emma felt a knot form in her stomach. "Did you ever hear anything about him after that?" "Nothing," Lieutenant Harper said. "We kept searching, but he was gone. We declared him missing in action, and that was that. He was one of the best men I ever served with. If he's alive, well, I don't know why he hasn't come back." "Do you think it's possible he just disappeared?" Emma asked, confused. "That he chose to stay hidden?" There was a long pause on the line before Lieutenant Harper spoke again. "Maybe, but Jack wasn't the kind of man to hide. Something happened to him. And if he's out there, he deserves to be found." With that, Emma's heart sank. If Jack had really survived that mission, then he had been living in silence all these years. Something had broken him. Something had forced him to disappear. And now he was sitting in a holding cell, arrested for stealing food. Emma couldn't help but feel a deep sympathy for him. The man she was representing wasn't just some homeless guy. He was a hero, a soldier who had been forgotten by the world. And the world was finally starting to notice him again. The next morning, Emma went to the courthouse, her mind racing. She needed to find Jack and figure out what had happened to him, what had driven him to this point. She knew there was more to his story than anyone could imagine, and she was going to uncover it, no matter what. After her conversation with Judge Harper, Emma felt like she had more questions than answers. Jack wasn't just a homeless man. He was a hero, someone who had been lost to the world for years. And now she was more determined than ever to help him find his way back. The next morning, Emma met Jack again, this time in a small room in the courthouse. He had been moved there from his holding cell, but he didn't seem any more relaxed. He sat on the bench, his shoulders stiff, eyes unfocused, like he was waiting for something to happen, or maybe waiting for nothing. "Jack," Emma said softly, walking in and sitting across from him. "We need to talk. I know things have been hard for you, but we're trying to understand what happened. You don't have to be alone in this." Jack didn't look at her at first. His eyes stayed fixed on the floor, his hands clenched into fists. Emma could tell he was still struggling, still trapped in the past, but she wasn't going to give up on him. "We know about the mission," Emma continued, "about what you did for your team. You saved people, Jack. You're not just some guy who made a mistake. You're a hero." That made Jack look up, but he didn't speak. He just stared at her, his face unreadable. "Why didn't you come home?" Emma asked, trying to keep her voice gentle. "Why didn't you reach out?" Jack swallowed hard, his throat tightening. He seemed to be weighing the decision, as if saying the words would open something he wasn't ready to face. "It wasn't that simple," he muttered, barely above a whisper. "I didn't know what to do. When you survive something like that, you don't come back the same. People expect you to be the same, but you're not." He looked away, his voice shaking now. "When I came to after everything happened, I didn't know what was real anymore. I didn't know who to trust. I couldn't go back to the army. They wouldn't have wanted me. And my family. They thought I was dead. They would have tried to help, but I couldn't let them see me like this." Emma leaned in, her heart aching for him. She could see the pain in his eyes, the years of trauma and loss he had carried alone. Jack hadn't been hiding because he didn't want help. He had been hiding because he thought he didn't deserve it. "Jack," Emma said softly, her voice filled with empathy, "you don't have to do this alone. We're here for you now. We'll figure this out. You don't need to be ashamed of what happened. It's not your fault." Jack blinked, the weight of her words slowly starting to sink in, but he still wasn't ready to let go of the wall he had built around himself. "I don't know if I can go back," he said quietly. "It's been too long. Too much has happened." "One step at a time," Emma said, her voice firm but kind. "We'll help you get through this, Jack. You've already done the hardest part by surviving. Now, it's time to take the next step." He was quiet for a long time, but eventually he nodded. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "We'll get you the help you need," Emma added, standing up. "You're not alone anymore." Jack finally looked up at her, his eyes softening just a little. "Thank you," he whispered. It was the first time he had said anything that felt like hope. The courtroom was still buzzing with confusion as Judge Harper left. People whispered to each other, unsure of what had just happened. Emma stayed in her seat, her mind racing. She couldn't believe what she had just witnessed. The judge had recognized Jack, recognized him as someone he knew from years ago. But why? Who was Jack really? As soon as the judge left, Emma stood up quickly. She knew she had to follow him, find out what he knew. She turned to Jack, who still sat motionless, his face blank, but with something dark behind his eyes. It was like he was waiting for something to happen, or maybe waiting for everything to fall apart. "Jack," Emma said softly, crouching down beside him. "I don't know what's going on, but we need to talk. You need to tell me what happened." He didn't answer. He just stared ahead, lost in thought, his hands resting on his knees. Emma's heart sank. She couldn't push him, but she knew something had to be said, something to bring him back into the world he had left behind. Before she could say anything else, a courthouse officer approached. "Miss Carlyle," the officer said, "Judge Harper wants to speak with you." Now, without another word, Emma followed the officer down a narrow hallway to a small side room. When she stepped inside, she was surprised to see Judge Harper sitting at a table, his hands folded. The door clicked shut behind her, and the room felt suddenly heavy, like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. "Sit down, Emma," the judge said, his voice calm but filled with emotion. "This isn't what it seems." Emma sat across from him, confused. What's going on? Who is Jack really? Why did you recognize him? Judge Harper sighed deeply, rubbing his face as if trying to shake off a memory that wouldn't leave him. Jack Davison, he began slowly, was one of the best soldiers I ever served with. Back when I was leading a special forces team, we were on a mission overseas, and things went wrong. Very wrong. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. We were supposed to pull out a group of civilians from a war zone. It was supposed to be clean, quick, but it all fell apart. We were ambushed. Jack, he saved my life that day. He carried me out of a burning vehicle, took fire to get me to safety. I never saw him again after that. What happened to him? Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper. We thought he was dead, Judge Harper said quietly. The explosion knocked everyone out. We searched, but there was no sign of him. We thought he had been taken by the enemy or killed in the blast. His body was never recovered. But he's alive, Emma said, stunned. He's been living on the streets all this time. I don't know why he disappeared, the judge admitted, his voice thick with regret. But I do know this. Jack Davison was a hero, and he deserves to be treated like one. Emma sat back in her chair, trying to process everything. Jack, the man sitting in the holding cell, was a soldier who had saved lives. He wasn't just another homeless man. He had a story that no one knew, a story that had been buried in silence for too long. We need to help him, Emma said firmly. He's been through too much. Judge Harper nodded slowly. We will. But first, we need to find out why he's been hiding, and why he didn't come back. It was just after 6 in the morning when the store manager at Murphy's Market called the police. He sounded annoyed, not angry. There's a homeless guy here. Looks like he took something. Bread and maybe a can of food. He's not causing trouble, just sitting outside now. Officer Mendez arrived a few minutes later. The sun hadn't fully come up yet, and the streets were quiet. Outside the store, sitting on the cold sidewalk, was a man wrapped in an old army jacket. His hair was messy, his beard thick and uneven. His boots were scuffed and falling apart at the seams. In his lap sat a half-open bag with a loaf of bread and a dented can of beans. He didn't run. He didn't argue. When Officer Mendez asked him to stand up, he nodded slowly and got to his feet. He moved stiffly, like his body was used to pain. The only thing he said was, "I'm sorry. I was hungry." At the station, he gave the name John Doe. No address, no phone number, no family. The system showed nothing. No records, no ID, just a fingerprint match that led to nowhere. He had completely disappeared from the world. The clerk at the front desk looked him over and whispered to the booking officer, "Just another one of those guys. Probably been on the streets for years." Meanwhile, the man sat quietly in the holding cell, hands folded, eyes staring at the wall. He didn't ask for anything. Not food, not a lawyer, not even a blanket. He just waited. Emma Carlyle was assigned as his public defender. She was young, fresh out of law school, and still believed in second chances. When she walked into the cell to meet her new client, she expected the usual. Someone angry, defensive, maybe even drunk or high. But John Doe was different. He looked up at her, his eyes calm but tired. The kind of tired that went beyond not sleeping. It was the kind of tired that came from carrying something heavy for a long, long time. "Mr. Doe?" Emma asked, sitting down across from him. "Just call me Jack," he said softly. She tilted her head. "Is that your real name?" He didn't answer. He just smiled a little and looked away. Emma noticed the way he sat, straight-backed, disciplined, like someone who had been trained to be alert. His boots, though worn out, were military. She saw the faint outline of a tattoo under his sleeve. She'd seen enough veterans to know one when she met one. "You served?" she asked. Again, no answer, just a slow blink. Emma left the cell with more questions than answers. Something about Jack wasn't normal. He wasn't just some guy stealing food. He didn't belong in a cell. She felt it in her gut. She decided right then she was going to find out who he really was. The day of Jack's trial arrived quickly. The courtroom was small and cold, the walls echoing every sound. Emma sat at the table, sorting through her notes, but she couldn't focus. She kept thinking about Jack. His eyes, the quiet way he carried himself, the army boots still worn even after all this time. When Jack was brought into the room, his face was calm, almost blank. His clothes were still the same, an old army jacket and ragged jeans. He didn't look like a criminal. He didn't look like someone who deserved to be in court. As he sat down beside Emma, she couldn't help but notice how stiff he was, like he was always prepared for something to happen. But nothing did. The prosecutor, a man named Gregory Harris, barely gave Jack a second glance. He went through the motions, talking about petty theft, a loaf of bread and a can of beans. The case was clear-cut, as far as he was concerned. Just another homeless person, just another crime, he muttered to himself. But Emma couldn't stop thinking about how wrong that felt. The judge, a middle-aged man named William Harper, shuffled through the case files. He looked tired, as if he had seen hundreds of cases just like this one. He barely looked up at Jack until the name John Doe was read out loud. Then everything stopped. Judge Harper's hand froze over the file. His eyes narrowed, then widened. He leaned forward, squinting at the man in front of him. John Doe, the judge repeated, his voice trembling ever so slightly. Jack didn't move, but something shifted in his eyes. A recognition, maybe, or just the weight of being seen after so long. He glanced up, his gaze meeting the judge's for the first time. The room went dead silent. Emma looked back and forth between them, unsure of what was happening. Then, to everyone's surprise, Judge Harper stood up. Slowly, deliberately. The room was still. The other lawyers, the clerk, even the bailiff, they all watched as the judge made his way down from the bench. "Jack Davison," the judge asked again, his voice low, but steady. "Is that really you?" Jack stared at the judge for a long moment before nodding, just barely. The tension in the room grew thick. Emma's heart began to race. This wasn't just some coincidence. This man, this John Doe, was someone from the past. The judge's face softened, almost in disbelief. You're the soldier from the mission," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. Jack's lips parted, but no words came out. He just looked at the judge, as if trying to understand what was happening. The judge looked like he might say something more, but then he simply turned and walked out of the room, leaving the courtroom in stunned silence. No one knew what to make of the moment. Emma sat frozen. She didn't know what had just happened, but she knew one thing for sure. This case was no longer just about petty theft. Something much bigger was unfolding. Emma sat across from Lieutenant Harper, the file heavy in her hands. She could feel the weight of it, like it carried the answers to all the questions she had been asking for weeks. She opened it slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. What would she find? The first few pages were reports from the mission, the failed extraction operation where Jack had been last seen. But as she flipped through, something caught her eye. A name, and then another. Military code names, Black Ops assignments. It was clear now. Jack wasn't just a soldier. He had been part of a covered operation, something the Army had worked hard to keep under wraps. "So what's the deal with these reports?" Emma asked, not looking up from the papers. "It's like Jack was involved in something way bigger than we thought." Lieutenant Harper nodded gravely. Jack was part of a special unit. Their mission wasn't just about saving civilians. They were after something far more dangerous. There were classified files involved, things the Army wanted to bury. Emma stopped reading and looked up at him. "So, what happened? Why did they disappear?" "It's complicated," Lieutenant Harper said, his voice tight. "After the mission went wrong, the Army needed to cover up what had really happened. Jack knew too much. They thought he was dead, but what if he wasn't? What if he was forced to disappear because of what he knew? So he was running from the army? Emma asked, stunned. Not exactly, Harper replied. Jack was never supposed to be part of that mission. It was a mistake. He got caught up in it, and when things went south, he became a liability. They didn't want him to talk, to expose the truth. Emma sat back, feeling the gravity of everything she had just learned. Jack had been betrayed by the very people who were supposed to protect him. He hadn't just been abandoned. He had been hunted, forced to live a life in hiding. What do we do now? Emma asked quietly, the weight of it all sinking in. We take it to the right people, Lieutenant Harper said, his voice firm. We expose the truth. Jack deserves his life back. He deserves justice. When Emma brought the news to Jack, he was quiet. He didn't show much emotion, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a mix of relief and fear. The truth was finally coming out, but it wasn't going to be easy. There would be a fight ahead, a battle for his name, for his freedom, for his future. But as Jack stood up and looked at Emma, he spoke for the first time in days. Thank you, he said, his voice steady but filled with gratitude. I don't know what's next, but I'm ready to face it. Emma smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known before. Jack wasn't just surviving anymore. He was ready to fight for his life, for his story, and Emma would be right there with him, every step of the way.